Let me tell you about the Kawasaki Ninja 400. If you've been following along, Kawasaki's introduced the new Ninja 400, which looks an awful lot like the old Ninja 300, and it kind of is. They held the line on price, they bumped up the displacement a little bit, and I wrote an article about this recently, kind of talking about how I think they took the wrong tack with this bike. Instead, what I thought Kawasaki, or perhaps one of the other OEMs, should do is give us the equivalent of the Mazda Miata. I want the Mazda Miata of motorcycles, a bike that concentrates on handling and concentrates on braking rather than focusing on horsepower first and adding in those other things as necessary. I think by bringing out a bike like this, one of the OEMs really could hit two segments with one bike. That yes, they could continue to serve the beginner segment, however, they may also be interested in getting some vet riders down into smaller bikes, people who want to rediscover the joy of riding a motorcycle that's just not quite as heavy. Now, I think they could do this really very simply. Throw a different front end on there, something that's got an upside down fork, something that's got dual disc brakes, possibly radial mount. Nothing like what I'm talking about really exists on the market right now. When I wrote about this, we had a lot of people comment on this, and I thought there were a couple good comments I wanted to sort of hash out and sort of, talk about. The first one up comes from Cosmic Charlie. Cosmic Charlie says, a 400 class up-spec bike is going to cost nearly as much as a liter class one. Sorry, Charlie. Here's the thing. This bike, the Ninja 400, is gonna run $5 grand. If you jump up to the next bike in Kawasaki's lineup, again, that has upside down front end and decent dual disc brakes on it, we're probably looking at the Z900. Now that's a motorcycle that costs $83.99. That's considerably more money. I think the Kawasaki should be able to get a good front end onto this motorcycle for no more than $1,000 to the consumer. It really wouldn't be that hard. Having said that, moving on to Ian M. Johnson. Ian says, a 400 is really just a weak-ass 600 class bike. Congratulations, Ian, you are phenomenal at math. Yes, obviously a 400 is not going to be as strong as a 600. Let's step back in history 1 second. We'll look at the original crop of 400 sport bikes. Those kind of failed miserably in America simply because they offered all of the weight of a 600, like you're saying, with not quite all of the power. However, those were i4 motorcycles. Remember, this is not an i4 bike, so this 400 would be much slimmer. It would not be as wide as a standard 600. But the other thing too is that it would not weigh nearly as much, be a much lighter motorcycle. Finishing up, we go to Jungle Death. Jungle Death says, Versus X 400, please. Can't agree with you more heartily here, Jungle Death. If you guys remember, I've kind of predicted the demise of the 300 class adventure bike, or at least I'm predicting they're not going to be explosively popular. And the reason I say that is that a true adventure bike really has to be able to cover big miles off-road, but they also have to be able to cover big miles on-road. A 300 class bike is really going to be singing its heart out when it's on the highway covering long freeway miles. Something like another 100 cc's here makes a huge difference. So I would agree, a 400 Versus X sounds phenomenal. Where 100 extra cc's doesn't make sense to me is in that beginner class of motorcycle. Instead, by concentrating on something that, sort of prized handling and prized suspension and braking ability, I think what Kawasaki or one of the other OEMs could do here is actually hit two segments with one motorcycle. Yes, they could also fill that beginner need for a nice, sporty, fun bike to learn on. However, I think they could also reinvigorate the love of vet riders for smaller bikes. Rather than get stuck with crappy componentry, instead, what you'd see is riders falling in love again with good quality, smaller motorcycles. Now, if you want more hot takes from me on this, make sure you tune in every month to the RevZilla Redline.